Imagine a world where a single verse of poetry holds the power of a literal army, and an unpaid blood debt means a lifetime of inescapable shame. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a true story from ancient Arabia that honestly feels like it was written for a massive Hollywood epic. We're talking betrayal, impossible choices, and just relentless vengeance. We're going to follow the life of Imru al-Qays, a man who lost the kingdom of sand only to conquer the empire of time.
Picture this. We're in the remote, sun-scorched desert of Damun. A young prince sits in exile, knocking back wine with his friends. He'd actually been banished by his own father, King Hoosier, for doing something you probably wouldn't expect, writing poetry. It was considered way too soft for a royal heir. But that quiet desert peace? It's about to be completely shattered. A messenger gallops into the camp, breathless and terrified, and he drops news that's going to echo through history. The Banu Asad tribe has revolted. King Hoosier is dead. Assassinated.
Up until this exact second, Imru al-Qays was basically the ultimate playboy poet. His days were just hunting, chasing romance, and living this life of totally careless luxury. But the instant that messenger speaks, that old version of him dies, right there on the spot. In his place, a vengeful warrior is born. The heavy, crushing weight of his father's blood is suddenly forced right onto his shoulders. It's a brutal destiny for a guy who, really just wanted to write.
And look, this jarring transformation isn't just some campfire myth. It is literally etched into ancient Arabic texts. Historical records document the exact moment our prince dropped the indulgences. His poetry, which used to be all about romance and lighthearted stuff, takes a massive dark turn. It suddenly becomes infused with these heavy themes of violent retribution and gritty resilience.
You have to understand, ancient Arabia was a deeply unforgiving arena. Survival out there relied entirely on tribal loyalty. And above absolutely everything else, there was the unbending law of the blood debt. If your father is murdered, you don't rest, you don't forgive, and you certainly don't negotiate until that blood is paid for. Failing to do so, that means your name is cursed forever.
So when the messenger drops this horrific news, the banished prince doesn't weep, he doesn't panic. According to the texts, he just holds his cup of wine, stares out over those barren dunes, and utters a phrase that has survived for centuries. Today is wine and tomorrow is action. It's chilling, right? It is the exact moment he accepts his terrifying new reality. The poet is gone, the avenger has awakened.
From there, Imru al-Qays begins this frantic, desperate scramble across the sands. He rallies neighboring tribes, the Banu Bakr and Taghlib, to hunt down the murderers. But the political stakes are just too high. His enemies are backed by the king of Al-Hira, who's in turn supported by the massive Persian Empire. Terrified of that overwhelming power, his allies abandon him in the dead of night. Betrayed, totally alone, he's hunted across the desert, and that is exactly how he earns his tragic title, the Wandering King.
Hunted and completely out of options, our wandering king makes a fateful decision. He rides to the towering fortress of Al-Ablaq to seek refuge with a Jewish tribal leader named Al-Samawal. Now, Imru al-Qays knows he has to travel far, far north to find an army strong enough to actually help him. But he can't drag his family into the perilous unknown, so he leaves his wife, his kids, and 100 sets of legendary, irreplaceable armor under the absolute protection of Al-Samawal before riding north.
But as we know, the ghosts of the desert aren't so easily outrun. Shortly after the prince rides off, an enemy warlord shows up with a literal army and surrounds the fortress. He demands that legendary armor. Al-Samawal refuses, locking the heavy fortress gates. But then comes a twist of agonizing cruelty. The enemy manages to capture Al-Samawal's young son, who happened to be hunting outside the walls. The warlord drags the boy right in front of the gates and issues an impossible ultimatum: hand over the Wandering King's armor or watch your son die.
I mean, put yourself in Al-Samawal's shoes for just a second. You're looking down from the fortress walls at your own flesh and blood, with a blade to its throat. The silence must have been absolute, deafening. Then Al-Samawal makes his choice. He shouts down, "I will not break my oath or betray my trust. Do what you will." The enemy warlord strikes. The boy is executed right before his father's eyes. It's a moment of just horrific sacrifice, but it immortalized Al-Samawal in Arabian history as the absolute ultimate symbol of loyalty and kept promises. Leaving those blood-soaked sands behind, the wandering king travels hundreds of miles into what was a completely alien world to him. He arrives at the glittering, monumental city of Constantinople. Picture this desert outcast, standing in the grand courts of the Byzantine Empire, coming face to face with Emperor Justinian himself, begging for the swords he needs to reclaim his birthright. And against all odds, the emperor listens. He actually sees a golden opportunity here. The enemies hunting Imru al-Qays, they're allied with Persia, which is Byzantium's greatest rival. So Justinian agrees. He hands the poet a massive, heavily armed Roman legion. Finally, after years of starvation, betrayal, and literally running for his life, the wandering king has his army. Vengeance is finally within his grasp.
He marches out of Constantinople at the head of this mighty force. The desert is calling him home. But then, tragedy strikes with brutal suddenness. As the army reaches Anatolia, near modern-day Ankara in Turkey, Imru al-Qays collapses. He never makes it back to the desert. He dies right there, agonizingly close to his lifelong goal. The emperor is actually so moved by this epic struggle that he orders a statue built over his grave in Ankara. Now you might be wondering, how does a battle-hardened king suddenly just drop dead? Well, history and folklore offer us two very different answers. The historical evidence strongly points to a devastating illness. The ancient texts refer to him in his final days as the man with ulcers, noting that his body broke out in these painful sores. This suggests he contracted a severe case of smallpox that ultimately took his life. But let's be real, legendary figures rarely get ordinary deaths. The folklore tells a much more sinister cinematic story. The legend says a rival named Altama whispered to the emperor that our poet was actually seducing the royal princess. Enraged, the emperor sends Imru al-Qays a magnificent cloak of woven gold as a parting gift. But the cloak is soaked in a corrosive poison. So when the poet puts it on, his flesh literally burns away. Now, historians definitely doubt this version, but it perfectly captures that mythological aura surrounding his tragic life. Whichever way he died, the result is exactly the same. His physical body failed in the foreign soil of Ankara. That great Roman army stopped its march. The murderers of King Hujar were never brought to justice by his son. From a purely worldly perspective, Imru al-Qays lost everything. His kingdom of sand just slipped through his fingers forever. But wait, because this is definitely not a story of defeat. Because Imru al-Qays possessed a weapon that was far sharper than Byzantine steel. He had his words. During those long, brutal years of desperate wandering, he composed a poem, a Muallaqat. This absolute masterpiece of pre-Islamic poetry was considered so impossibly beautiful, so profoundly moving, that the ancient Arabs actually inscribed it in gold and hung it on the very walls of the Kaaba in Mecca for everyone to see. Stop. Let us weep at the memory of a loved one and a dwelling. Those are the haunting opening words of his legendary poem, known as Kifa Nabki. In just that single line, you can practically feel the raw isolation of the desert, the eternal grief of a banished son, and the enduring spirit of a wandering soul. The guy completely revolutionized Arabic poetry, inventing ways to describe landscapes, love, and loss that poets are literally still imitating to this very day. The wandering king never won back his physical throne, but by transforming his profound, crushing pain into timeless art, he became the undisputed prince of Arabian poets. His words survived empires, they outlasted armies, and they defeated time itself. Which leaves us with a pretty lingering thought to carry with you today. Does true immortality come from the worldly crowns we so desperately try to wear, or does it come from the artistic words we leave behind? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.